With us, joining us this afternoon is James Eklund, who is the lead litigator, practitioner for water and natural resources at Sherman and Howard. And also, of course, James has worked at all levels of government, multi-state authorities, state agencies, you name it. He's worked at that, with those government institutions. He has also served as the lead negotiator for our state and signatory on the Colorado River Drought Contingency Plan, and as director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. James, thank you for joining me. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Luigi. Thanks for the opportunity. It's definitely eventful times that we're in. And all the places I've worked, the Air Force is not one of them, but my brother is an Air Force, former Air Force officer. So I've got to explain the shirt I have on before people go, wait a minute.
What does AF mean? That's interesting. Oh, and thank you for that explanation. So the feds came up with their analysis. It's a how do we describe this? A non-action action at this point, something along those lines. It outlines kind of three potential plans, right? One is no plan, which means status quo, and then there's an alternative one and an alternative two, and they both describe potential water cuts in addition to what the states have already agreed to do, and they aggressively become more painful, if you will. And depending on which plan you take, it's either going to be really painful for Arizona, California, and Nevada, or they kind of share the pain, something along those lines. But James, so tell me what your reaction is to this analysis.
Yeah, so you're spot on. Our federal government released a draft, what they call a draft environmental impact statement yesterday, that sets out various options for managing the river, the Colorado River, in light of the water supply demand imbalance gripping the basin. And I'm sure your readers have read about that in your pages and elsewhere. And it's also good to note that the great snow that we've received this year doesn't solve that imbalance, so which is really structural in nature. So this is the federal government's attempt to try and address that. I did the math. This is 768 pages that lay out the foundation for critical leadership on the Colorado River. I'm still working my way through it because it is a lot, and there are a lot of tables in the appendices that are very important to understanding the impacts and that pain you described. I'm a Teddy Roosevelt fan. Teddy Roosevelt said, "Talk softly and carry a big stick." And for the past year, the feds have been talking loudly and carrying no stick. So this draft EIS really, finally shows the stick. Whether or not they have to use it is now really up to the states and their water users. But if the federal inaction and failure to follow through on the threats that they have made over the course of the last year had lost our attention, I'm pretty sure they have that attention now. And why is that? Well, for two reasons. One, both alternatives the feds describe, the action alternatives, like you said, there's a no action alternative as well. But for the action alternatives, the feds describe them, they involve a great deal of pain and disruption to the lower basin that will inevitably ripple upstream to Colorado and the upper basin, either in the form of food security, because they grow a lot. If 90% of the winter green vegetables that we consume in Colorado or other parts of our nation come from the lower basin. And remember, we're talking about cutting water use by about the same amount of water the entire state of Colorado uses in an average year. So talking about a lot of water. And so that's the first reason. The second reason is our federal government has demonstrated with these two action alternatives, it is at least willing to consider and potentially act to upend or essentially modify the priority system that we have, kind of grown up with and we've evolved under. And that's another reason that Coloradans should pay very close attention to this, even though they won't find much in the way of the state of Colorado being mentioned in the draft environmental impact statement. Because at the end of the day, we are going to be impacted by the cuts that are imposed down there. And again, if the federal government is willing to do this to the largest state population-wise in our nation, they've demonstrated they're perfectly willing to take whatever action they feel is needed in a state like ours. So I think it's very important for us to realize the moment that we're in, and this is it's a big deal, and it's an opportunity for leadership. And that leadership has been absent to date. We have not, as 7 basin states, gotten together, hopefully showing the stick and really, backing up the threats that have been made, or the potential of backing up those threats, will make the interest, the water users, the states themselves, come back in a more concerted effort to find agreement and fill that vacuum, that void of leadership that has been created over the last several years.
This is the federal government saying to the basin states, both upper basin and lower basin states, you really need to get your act together. Because if you don't do that, we got this plan, and it's a hammer. It's a pretty big hammer. And the other thing you're saying too is that, okay, Colorado is not mentioned. We're not going to bear the immediate pain in any of these alternative plans that they have designed. But at some point, we're going to be affected by it. But also, you're saying that by potentially implementing any of these 2 plans, the feds are effectively upending this seniority rights priority system that we've had in this river that governs the system for about 100 years. They're saying we're willing to upend that. And if they can upend that, they can upend whatever system we have that we follow in our state.
Yeah, they'll have to use different tools because the rules are different in the lower basin than they are in the upper basin. But they do manage massive amounts of infrastructure, water infrastructure in the upper basin that they are perfectly capable of managing in a different way. And if we don't, demonstrate what we can do in a voluntary, compensated, and temporary way, they are demonstrating with this draft environmental impact statement that they can do things that are involuntary, and they are uncompensated or low compensated, and they are potentially permanent. So, it would be really folly for us to say, or to walk away from this moment with the idea that that's their problem. I'm really glad they're just talking about the lower basin, and because what is happening down there can happen up here. It will look different. It will feel a little different, but it will involve pain and disruption of the type that we will have wished we could have avoided. I've been saying this for the last several years, and we really are running out of time on this. We have the tools to make this, control our own destiny and make this pain and this disruption. We can mitigate those, but we do have to act. If we don't, that's where we're going to get in trouble.
James, I'm gonna just turn on the lights again. Okay, give me like 2 seconds.
Yeah,
here.
no problem.
So, two questions for you, and then I'll let you go. One is that are we looking at litigation here? Do we, in either scenario, especially the one in which the lower basin states, Nevada, California, and Arizona, under the proposal that they would be sharing the pain, are we going to see litigation from California? And then the other question I have is, can the feds actually do this? Do they actually have the authority to do it?
Good, two excellent questions. I'll take the first one. So they are litigation is definitely a possibility, and to say otherwise is would not be accurate. Um, Litigation, I think everyone knows this, and if you're hearing it from a water lawyer, you know it can be true because uh, you really don't want this to be resolved in a courtroom. You want it to be done in a conference room, and if you litigate, the uncertainty and the disruption that comes along with that litigation is so really catastrophic that
And it
it
limits
doesn't
your
add
options
any
right away, right?
certainty. Yeah,
It limits
it
your
does.
options.
Yeah, there's no silver bullet there. It takes a long time to get to the end of the road of a process like that. And in the meantime, we're going to have to manage a system, and that system's not going to behave the way we want it to behave, most likely. So that that's it is clear that there are interests that uh, are infringed upon by various alternatives that, whether it's the first alternative, which is really um, the the California, the more favorable, the California alternative, that if that one is adopted, then you've got some really difficult to manage impacts to the Central Arizona project and the non-Californian lower basin interests that probably draws litigation and fire if that one is picked. If the second alternative, which is the more equitable distribution of the pain, irrespective of seniority, meaning it hits California harder than the alternative one does. If that one's selected, then Californians are going to say, listen, I have relied upon the certainty and the seniority that has come along with my water use. And now you're saying that doesn't have the value that I thought it did. And, you again, you either need to compensate me for that, or you're going to probably have to deal with me in court or some sort of settlement negotiation. So that's the answer to your first question. The second question, though, is also could, which is, does the federal government have the authority to do this? There are interests in the lower basin who will say, no, they do not, even though they're the water master of the lower basin. And I use that term very specifically because that was one of the outcomes of the Arizona v. California litigation that took decades to resolve and really resulted in the federal government saying, listen, you couldn't act like adults. Your two states just fought each other. And so instead of doing what the upper basin states did, which was come up with another agreement, we did that in 1948 with the Upper Basin Compact, you guys ran to court. So we're going to have an adult supervise in the lower basin, and that adult's going to be the Secretary of the Interior. So the authority to release water out of Lake Mead, which is a federal reclamation facility, that is held by the Secretary of the Interior. The question will be, does that authority extend to a reshuffling of seniority priorities in the lower basin, or is it short of that? And so people will argue about that. I'm sure they're arguing about it right now. We probably argued about it in one way, shape, or form for years. But that designation of being the water master only applies in the lower basin. In the upper basin, that was the reward we got for doing the interstate compact instead of litigating. We got to create this organization, this entity called the Upper Colorado River Commission, and that commission basically plays the role of determining how much water is being consumed in each state and what kind of distribution of pain would need to occur should the river continue to suffer as it has to date. So we're in a moment where all of this stuff is going to be argued about, either in public or behind closed doors, and we're going to have to reconcile the priority system that we've created with the fact that we've grown fairly large, millions of people in population centers that are on relatively junior priorities. That's kind of the tension, and it really demands that our water management decisions from here on out, we need to sharpen our pencil and get really good at what we do so that we can mitigate the impact.
And correct me if my analogy is not quite accurate, but the feds have the faucet which they can turn on and off, and regardless of who gets that, which part and how big of a part of the water that flows out of the faucet, the fact that they can turn that faucet on and off and can control how much water gets out, that's the stick that they carry.
Great analogy for the lower basin. In the upper basin, the faucet, continuing your analogy, it's like they have their hand on one of the knobs and the states have their hand on one of the other knobs. And we kind of do a dance, and it's a delicate dance to get the water just right so that those releases are enough to satisfy the demand, but not so much that they're eroding our insurance policy for a dry year down the road.
Anything else you want to add, James?
We've got to work this problem from the supply side and the demand side. From the supply side, it's how we manage our water. And in the Front Range of Colorado, we've got to do better with how we manage groundwater and surface water conjunctively. We just do. And on the demand side, we've got to get better with how we conserve water. In the municipal setting, we can be doing things like gray water. Indoor gray water use is a great way to conserve water. In the agricultural setting, which is where my family ranches, we can pay farmers to conserve water and put that water into the system, thereby allowing us some modicum of control over how this system is going to behave and how we're going to manage it. And that can be, again, that can be compensated, temporary, and it can be voluntary. If we don't do that, Luigi, the problem we run into is it will be done not by us, it will be done to us, and it will be unpaid, and it will be permanent. And that is a future that we don't want to see. Whether you're in Denver or on the western slope of Colorado or really anywhere in this basin, you want to control your own destiny if at all possible. We have a moment to do that. We got to get about the work. It's going to be hard, and you're going to have to sit down with people you might not like, but we've got to do that in order to essentially, control our own destiny.
Human beings are really good at dealing with a crisis once the crisis is at hand. And sometimes you have to be sort of at the precipice of when things break down. That's when you find, or at least start to find the solutions to the crisis, to the problem. James, thank you for your time, sir. And I'll see you soon. Okay?
Thanks for asking all the questions. They're the right ones.
Thank you, sir. Bye for now.
Bye now.